question is when you don't have technology like this to quantify, external training loads, probably what the next best option and what they used to do back in the day is use RPEs, which is a rating of perceived exertion. Essentially, after a session, you ask the players to score that session on a scale of 1 to 10. How hard did that session feel? And then you times that by the session duration, and you get an arbitrary figure of training load. So say the session was a 60-minute session, and they gave an RPE of 8, 8 out of 10. You would times 60 by 8, and you would get a score of, who's good at maths? Not me. 480, yeah? Yeah. So 480 for that session. And then you would do that for each session that you have in a day or through the week. And from there, you can start to monitor how are we tracking in terms of our training loads from week to week. Are we increasing, or are we remaining stagnant, or are we going down? Sometimes you might actually want to go down when you're trying to freshen the players up for maybe the final or a key game. But say during the preseason, you ideally want to see training loads go up to stimulate adaptation. We get fitter, we get stronger. But bear in mind, continually going up without ever coming down is going to increase risk of injury and overtraining. So that's why it's important to have unload or deload weeks, probably after every 3 or 4 weeks. Drop it back down, let the body regenerate, recover before we load them up again. Does that answer the question? So I just wanted to share a few examples of how we actually use the GPS for reporting. These are some of the reports that we'll give to the coaches and to some of them to the players as well for feedback on their outputs during a session. So this is just a session summary. How this works, actually, once we download the GPS onto the laptop, we export from the laptop, and I'm putting this into a different sort of software called PowerBI. It's part of the Microsoft suite of applications. It's just that I find it a bit easier for creating visualizations than doing everything on Excel. So just to go over this, the good thing about Power BI is that I can really interact with each page, and there's drop downs. I can choose what date I want to look at. If there's multiple sessions in a day, I can choose which day. Up here on the left, this is just a summary of what our forwards did versus our backs. We've got total distance, so this was quite a big session. This was a match replacement conditioning session. So the guys that didn't play on game day, typically either on the Friday morning or on a Saturday, they have another training session to try and replicate the fitness demands of a game. So this will typically involve a lot of conditioning games, contact blocks, not so much sort of coach-driven skill work. This is mainly driven by the S&Cs. And as you can see, it's quite decent numbers. The forwards covered just under 7 kilometers, the backs just over 7.5. HMLD is high metabolic load distance. Jim covered it in one of his first slides. But that's a key metric that we like to look at, which encompasses anything that is high-intensity running. So that is both high-speed running above 20 kilometers an hour, or distance covered accelerating and decelerating in short spaces. Because if we just look at high-speed running itself, it doesn't account for high-intensity actions that are covered at low speeds, if that makes sense. If I'm sprinting 5 meters here, I'm doing a hard acceleration, but I'm not reaching 20 kilometers an hour, but it's still taking a lot of energy out of my body. So that's where this metric will account for that. So we just use it to gauge all the high intensity running that they did. Okay, so this slide here, this was based on 2023 and 2024 match data, just across 4 metrics, because the thing is, there's so many metrics, you don't want to be bogged down and overloaded. You want to pick a few key ones that are important to you and then track them well. So the first column, TD, that's total distance. RD, that's running distance. Essentially, running distance is anything over 7 kilometers an hour. It takes out any of the walking distance that total distance captures. So you can see, for example, the props, this is peak match demands, 5.5 kilometers of total distance. However, only 3.1 was actually running. So approximately 2.4K was walking. Yeah? Does that make sense? So I like to look at what sort of running are they actually doing. Then we've got our HMLD, which is their high intensity work, and high speed running, which is typically more relevant for the backs. The forwards not so much, because they don't have those opportunities as often. Maybe the loose forwards a little bit, but the type 5 don't really get many opportunities. So we can look at our peak match demands. So this is the highest anybody in each position scored throughout the last 2 seasons. Or we can look at our average match demands. So this is anyone who's playing above 75 minutes. And you can see they're quite different. For example, a prop, his highest recorded, I think this was Hetet in a Chiefs game. He covered 420 high-speed running. However, the prop's average is about 89 meters in a game, which is a massive difference. Similarly with, if we're looking at outside backs, fullbacks and wingers, peak match demands require over 1,000 meters of high-speed running, but in an actual game, they might be hitting closer to 700, okay? So one thing we like to do is, especially for the guys who are not playing on the weekend, we'll try and be hitting close to these peak match demands, because often they're not going to get it in an actual game, so we can control a training environment a lot better, and we've got time, you know? We've got the whole day to hit these numbers. One thing that this helps us do is also set our targets for certain training sessions. Say on a Tuesday, which is typically a match day -4, we might be looking to say, okay, this week we want to hit 90% of our average match day demands on a Tuesday, which is usually our longer, bigger, more extensive sessions. What I do is I'll download every single game for every single player throughout the last 2 seasons, and then I filter it so I'm not including guys who have come off the bench, because they're going to bring the average down. So typically I'll say 75 minutes plus, and this is the average for each position. So I might have 8 props in a squad, and they might each play, I don't know, 6 or 7 games. I've averaged all of that down to this row here. So you'll have some guys, some props whose average is higher, some props whose average is lower, but overall, this is the best sort of I can get to get a gauge of what props cover.
Thank you.
And as you can see, our halfbacks and fly halves tend to cover the most of everything, really. Therefore, and I mean it's common sense, they should be the fittest in our teams, yeah? And in trainings, they should be covering the most distance as well, because they have the highest game loads. After, I'm still in the process of doing some season review, and these numbers will be updated to include all of this last season's data as well. As you can see, I've got a lot of different tabs. A lot of them don't get included in the reports. But I just wanted to show you some of them. So this is a session summary. We can then go and look into particular drills in a training session and then compare athletes. So these are some of our conditioning games. This is AFL touch, and I'm just ranking them by meters per minute. So that's their average speed per minute. And then HMLD per minute. So that's looking at, of the distance that they covered, how much of that is high intensity. and then what percent of their max speed did they hit. So a couple of boys in this game, AFL Touch, they hit over 90%, which is pretty good, because often it's hard to get over 90% in conditioning games. But the way this game is set up is it's like offside touch, but you can only be touched by one person. So they follow you around the field. And if you break away from them, then it's a one-on-one chase. So that's where you get some speeds in. This was another game, slightly lower meters per minute and not as much high-speed running. We didn't get anyone over 90%. Another thing that we like to look at is just a week summary. So I can filter what week we want to look at, and then you can see the different position groups, how many sessions they completed, how many minutes, and then this one's got a few more different metrics, and we can, quite easily compare using these colored bars, who's doing more, who's doing less. Another thing that we have here is a drill library. So based on our historical training data, I've put them into a couple of different groups. So we've got conditioning drills, which is typically more straight line running stuff. We're not using a ball. These are our conditioning top-up blocks. Then we've got games conditioning, which is with a ball, and the boys are still working hard getting conditioning, but they're using communication, skills, decision making. So it's a lot more game specific. And then these are our rugby drills, typically led by the coaches. So we can then compare against different drills to certain physical outputs. Lastly, I'll probably just touch on our speed tracker. So sprinting has been shown to be both a risk factor for hamstring injuries, but it's also been shown to be protective against hamstring injuries. So the vaccine and the virus are the same thing. The thing that makes it a vaccine is getting the right dose of speed work in. And one thing that we try to do is try and get, especially for the backs, at least one hit above 90% once a week. Yep, that's to make sure they're getting that exposure, because sprinting is the most neuromuscularly taxing thing your hamstrings will ever experience. So we don't want to go many weeks without exposing them to that. For the forwards, probably 2 to 3 weeks. It's very rare that they'll hit 90% in a game, potentially a loose forward, but the tight five, I think we might have had less than 3 or 4 exposures above 90% in matches this season, just because they're not really getting that opportunity. But it's something that we like to track. So I can see over the course of how many weeks. I'll color code it. So green means they've hit 90. So we've got some guys who are a bit more regular, like this fella here. He likes to sprint often. Then you might have some guys who won't do it, who won't hit 90% unless we actually manufacture a sprint for them. So we create a sprint block because they're not getting it in the rugby. So we might at the start of a session plan ahead. Okay, these boys haven't hit a top speed this week. Let's go for it today. A lot of it depends on how many units you get. There's different packages. Are you getting it for 1 year? Are you on a 3-year contract? I think the longer deal, the cheaper it is. So most professional team sports are now using GPS as a way to monitor loads and to really make sure that we're training for the demands of the game. And it's a way to keep players accountable because, the numbers don't lie, and it's great feedback. Hopefully that was, learn some new things. I'm still learning this. I've been working with GPS for 5 or 6 years, and there's still a lot for me to learn, and it's always going to be a journey doing that. But yeah, the best way to learn is to just practice and get your hands on it. If you're able to get some experience working with a team that does have it, what we want to do is really grow the local, strength and conditioning community here.
Okay, sir.
So try and get my email or WhatsApp off someone, and we can make it happen. Next, we just want to show you guys some other sports science equipment that we use to monitor leg power, player fatigue, readiness to train. which is the force decks.